we vote for members of parliament. They determine who the executive. So the same people, one election determines the executive, and the very same parliament, in the end of the day, appoints judges. So how separate is it really?
Will former Chief Justice Mogoeng be allowed to run for public office? This is a question that I posed to Daniël Eloff, an attorney, in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. You can watch the full-length discussion by clicking on the link in the description below. Enjoy. So, Daniel, I don't want you to impugn the integrity of the judiciary, but what do you think is the state of the judicial system at the moment?
I mean, it's such a big question, and I think my concern, my personal view is our courts are good when it comes to questions which aren't sort of ideological or political in nature, right? It's just inequitable when it comes to sort of commercial matters or when it comes to everyday type of things. My concern comes in when it's a very heavy political type of flavor to a case, and I have a concern that with those cases they do tend to get rather partisan or at least ideological. And I mean, it's probably not surprising. I mean, I mentioned this earlier this year at a meeting at my alma mater, but a law faculty tends to sort of be at the forefront of these ideological battles and usually very much progressive and ahead of the rest of the university. Sort of postmodernist thinking, critical studies sort of first really take root at the law faculty, and then it sort of gradually moves over to all the other faculties, probably the humanities faculty and the law faculty. It starts there. But I tend to think law faculties even more than humanities faculties. And I think the same happens with our courts in a way, because the same, students of a couple of years ago who were at these universities being taught all of these critical studies end up becoming attorneys and judges and advocates. So I do think our courts, we don't in South Africa have this very partisan split between, clearly conservative judges and clearly progressive judges. In South Africa, I tend to think the majority of the judiciary really is part of the same broad political grouping. You obviously have strange anomalies like our former Chief Justice, who's now recently started his own political party, where he has sort of these schizophrenic views on a couple of things. He's, this fundamental Christian, but then on the other hand, he really does have a lot of progressive views, which is perhaps in some sort of political spectrums a bit bizarre, but potentially not. It probably depends on how you view the world. So
Daniel, do you think he's actually allowed to run for public office given his previous role as Chief Justice?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you read sort of the law black and white, then no, he's not. I guess the question just becomes if he's willing to give up his sort of the perks of being a retired judge. If he's able to repudiate those perks and say, well, I no longer want it, whether he'll be permitted to do so. I mean, I should perhaps just point out that it's not the first time that we have a judge, although I think it's the first time we have a Chief Justice going to a political party, but it's not the first time that we'll have a judge in South African history that after sitting on the bench goes and enters politics. It happened before. It happened, I think, in the 1920s, and it happened in the 70s. So it's not strange. I think the strange thing here is it's an actual Chief Justice, and it's sort of the new constitutional dispensation. I think it would be a flippin' interesting court case regarding his personal limitation of rights, whether it's justifiable in an open and democratic and constitutional country to limit the rights of a former judge to form a political party or to be part of a political party. I mean, I think, yeah, that would be a flippin' interesting case, and I'd love to get involved with that if it ever gets to that point. Although I think we still should see how this is going to play out. I think it's sort of going to be a case where he's going to be the honorary chairperson of the political party, but not really involved, trying to walk this precarious line, try and justify his involvement. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting.
Well, what about judicial appointments? Because we have the Judicial Services Committee or Commission, which is staffed mostly by politicians. national members of parliament, members of the provincial legislatures, and also the executive has some say there. There's the profession is also represented, the bar, the academia, but they seem to be outgunned by politicians. Do you think it's appropriate for us to give so much power to politicians to make judicial appointments?
Yeah, so I guess the question is what the alternative is, right? I mean, in the States, you have governors appointing state judges, and you have the president appointing federal judges, which perhaps there you could argue it's even worse because you just have one individual doing it, one politician. But I mean, in South Africa, it really does. I think it is a massive issue. We love to say we have this very clear separation of powers, but do we really, right? We have national elections. We vote for members of parliament. They determine who the executive. So the same people, one election determines the executive, and the very same parliament, in the end of the day, appoints judges. So how separate is it really? And I mean, that's why if you actually go and look into a lot of the background and histories of our judges, it won't be surprising to see a bunch of judges who 20 years ago were mayors of municipalities or heads of different state institutions or whatever. I mean, it does happen. That's sort of it's common practice in South Africa. And obviously, if they've been in political positions, they have a particular political affiliation, which at least in theory they've now had to again put a distance between them and their former affiliations. But I mean, in reality, if you it's the same with a sports team. If you're once a gunner, always a gunner type of thing, right? Are you really going to just
never walk alone? Yeah.
Yes, never walk alone. Exactly, right. It's sort of it's part of you. So unless you really left the party on bad terms, you're still going to be rather not necessarily biased, but you're going to be in support of that party and its policies. And we still have a situation where the ANC still are the national party and is still the national party in power at this point. And a lot of these judges, were formerly affiliated with the ANC. So, yeah, perhaps to get to your question, I think there's a lot of work to be done with reform on how we appoint our judges. I, for example, think a very proper and simple solution to just get a bit more of decentralization and a bit more of distance between the politicians, at least on a national level, and judges, would be, well, allow each province to appoint their own judges for their divisions, right? That would make a lot of sense, at least. It already decentralizes power. But, I think that's way too federalist for our current national government to even consider.
Well, I'm a big fan of federalism and devolution, so I would certainly support that initiative. And you mentioned the various regional courts. In the Western Cape High Court is really rocked by controversy with John Hlophe and lots of allegations flying around there, which I really don't think looks very good for the profession in that part of the country.
Yes, I mean, and now you sort of, again, you have this tension between a provincial government that really wants to push its agenda. And there've really been cases in the Western Cape High Court where you can clearly see that agenda of the DA government in the Western Cape being sort of blocked. Which, again, it's expected when you have a politicized bench, you're going to have sort of these politicized outcomes. So I mean, the Western Cape's a good example of it. And the problem is, judges can be shipped to the Western Cape because it's sort of it's determined on a national level, right? Had it been the case where the Western Cape had more autonomy, or every province had more autonomy to pick their, preferred judges, I think it changes the picture. I mean, it doesn't solve all problems, right? It doesn't take the politics out of it, but it like you says, it devolves power. And I think in the end of the day, it's a step in the right direction.
Do you think it's possible to have a completely depoliticized judicial system?
I don't think so personally. I mean, I always use the example that it's a person sitting there, on the bench. It's in the law, we're taught about this, this objective, learned judge sitting on the bench, who's impartial and unbiased and just looks at the facts. But I mean, the point is, he's a person, he or she's a person, the person's flawed, the person has the own biases. And I think it's rather difficult. And probably that's why in South Africa we have the situation where when it comes to court cases which aren't politicized, we get decent judgments and it's fair and it's equitable. But the moment it becomes politicized, it's not as unbiased and impartial. But I guess the point is that likely like that all over the world. I mean, how else do you get judges who remain completely neutral, uninvolved in politics, don't read the news, aren't concerned about what government does? To me, it's sort of seems impossible to achieve that. I don't know if you think it's possible to achieve an impartial bench.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, you might want to check out the full-length interview with Daniël Eloff. That's linked over here. You can also subscribe to my other channel. That's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.